Hello and welcome to my fifth installment of my track by track, album by album exploration into the work of Led Zeppelin. So today we are up to Houses of the Holy. I have my copy here with the very famous cover. This came out in 1973, released in March 1973. The long-awaited Led Zeppelin album at the time when they were at the peak of their powers. I think they'd been on tour in Australia and then they rocked up to Stargroves, which was a big manor house owned by Mick Jagger, the same place where they recorded Led Zepp 4 or the untitled album. And they brought the Manor Mobile up and started work there again. This album was going to be different, and the reason is because John Paul Jones and Jimmy Page had installed recording studios back at their houses, their respective houses, so they were able to bring in fully formed tunes that were highly arranged, and that's what we see on this album. This album pushes arrangement to the limits, both keyboards and guitar. And in that respect, it seems to move away from the hard rock, heavy rock of Led Zeppelin to a sound which is much more progressive and much more keyboard heavy, which I think has made this one a favourite amongst progressive rock fans. It also seems to move away from the darkness of the first four albums. This one, there's a lot more humour, there's a lot more fun on this album. It's a very upbeat, happy album, although the moments of darkness here are very dark. So I would say that Led Zeppelin's trajectory is one of two phases. It's the first phase of like becoming the biggest band in the world, and they really make their first four albums in just over 2 years, right? Then they're off on tour, and then they come back into the studio to make this fifth album. And I imagine the expectations for this album would have been very high. And they're starting now to be able to step off, that sort of incredibly fast conveyor belt that they're on and think, what do we want to do next and where do we stand? And from this point on, actually the history of Led Zeppelin becomes a lot more twisty-turny, chaotic, a lot of staying away from the UK and tax exile. There's Robert Plant's car crash in Greece, then the death of his son, Karak, the alcoholism, drug use, all these things. Suddenly, they seem to have less of a forward-moving trajectory, and very quickly they're moving into a different world of disco and punk. And so this, in a way, is the last grand hurrah. The next album, of course, is going to be classic, but on the whole, it's going to be culled from all bits and bobs from this period as well, including a couple of tracks off this album. So if you imagine them turning up, they're the biggest band in the world, they've got all these tracks arranged, they turn up to Stargroves. Now, if you want to know what Stargroves is like, I imagine it as being that stately home that I used to watch in the background of Tom Baker's Doctor Who films. In the 70s, I used to watch Doctor Who. I wasn't a fan of Doctor Who. In fact, I didn't like Doctor Who, but I used to watch it because it was on kids' TV. And if you remember them walking around that sort of grey, white, stately home, that was Stargroves. I find this quite interesting. That's the thought of, Robert Plant and Jimmy Page stomping around the same place as Tom Baker and the Daleks or whatever horrible. I don't think it was the Daleks, was it? It was something about the pyramids on Mars. I don't know. Some sort of weird creature that probably didn't look real. Anyway, so that might give you an idea of where they're at. They're not in a recording studio. They're living in this cranky old manor house, and they're living and breathing music, something that we would love to do. They didn't finish the album off there. They then went over to Olympic Studios, did a bit more recording, and then they travelled over to Electric Lady Studios to finish the album off. And this is where they also recorded the legendary Elvis Presley album, which has never been released, although I have heard it. And I was told that it was because John Paul Jones had left the band at this point. So they decided to do an album of Led Zepp covers. I wish they'd put it out, but of course it would probably be too hard to negotiate your way through all the copyright. Anyway, let's start with the cover. So at this point, the graphic design company Hypnosis had developed a way of fleecing very, very rich rock stars out of vast amounts of money to make album covers that were usually, you know, made in very exotic locations on huge budgets. Now, the two guys that owned it, Storm Thorgerson, or whatever his name is, he already was commissioned to do the album cover. He came up with a picture of a tennis racket. The Led Zepp guys thought, what are they trying to say? You know, that this our music is a racket, and they didn't like that. So the other guy, the Aubrey guy, they sent him off with two kids to the Giant's Causeway. Okay. An aside here is, I once did a gig in Dublin with Robert Plant, and one morning he woke up and says, do you fancy having a trip out to the Giant's Causeway? And I could have spent that day on the Giant Causeway with Robert Plant, but I was too hungover then, so I decided to stay in bed. Anyway, Aubrey Powell, is it? He rocked up to the Giant Causeway with these two kids in tow. Is it Samantha Gates and I think the other brother? Is it Stephen Gates? Anyway, I can't quite remember the other brother's name. Remember, I make these videos off the top of my head, so I'm trying to pull a lot of information in here. Anyway, they took lots and lots of photographs that he then colorized and patched together into that. Now, of course, today I might get in trouble showing you this cover. I don't know how this will work out, but and I'm not going to say anything about that area of it. It's a very striking cover indeed. The brother has gone on to become a famous chef here in the UK. You can go and check that out if you don't believe me. And the daughter, Samantha, she's the little girl that crops up on the back of Presents as well. But there was a rumour when I was young that was actually a young Samantha Fox, but I can put that to bed. Not Samantha, obviously, but the idea that she's on that. And then when we open it up, we get this this castle here. You know, looking very ominous, and there's a naked man holding a child up to sacrifice, and a light emerging from the top of the castle. That there, if you're wondering what that there, that's the sun obviously coming up. That's not the sun, that's a scratch on my album. Take the album out, which I will, and we get the very iconic Houses of the Holy logo there. All right. All right. You see, that one is the one that's backwards, and that's the one that's forwards, as above, so below. This logo is iconic because in America, although the band released this with no information on whatsoever, much like the Untitled album, including absolutely nothing on the spine, you can see there's nothing to denote this is a Led Zeppelin album or what the name of it is. If we take the album out and look on the label, of course, mine was bought in the 1980s, but it's still on Atlantic. We get that classic Atlantic logo. We've not got Swan Song yet. Right, so I think we've established, you know, the sort of packaging, except I was going to say that in America, the band relinquished and had that put on a paper strip that went around the album that you could slip off, you know, so people would be able to find the album. It's sold well, it's gone diamond, it's sold over 10 million copies, it's probably up to near 20 million now. I think it's an absolutely great album, but it doesn't seem to be quite in the same category as the first four classic Zepp albums. And I also think it's seen by many as being lesser than Physical Graffiti. So this is put this in says almost like the bottom 3 or 4 of Zepp albums, which is quite a shock because I think it's a magnificent album. This is probably a testament to how great Zepp was. Right, so it opens up, we're going to go track by track, opens up with Song Remains the Same. Right, this was originally called the Overture, and I think when you listen to it, it sounds like the sort of overture you would get to a Led Zepp album. And I imagine, especially the way it first starts out, that the whole track may have been envisaged as an instrumental. There's a long instrumental section, very winding, very arranged, very proggy in fact, But the progginess is coming from the incredible arrangement of Jimmy Page's guitar. A lot of people criticize Jimmy Page, and I've probably done it too. You know, some of his solos are a bit, scrappy, but there's nothing wrong with scrappy guitar solos. I love the story about Jimmy Page in the studio trying to get this one guitar bit, and he couldn't get it, and he turned around to the engineer and says, "Oh, that'll do. They'll get the idea." And I think that's great. We need more of that. Once you've got the idea down, it's done. Move on. Keep it real. But his genius is really in the way his guitar relates to the production process. This was one of the few musicians of that era who had a 10-year apprenticeship pretty much in the UK session scene, playing with everyone from Petula Clark to the Kinks to the Who. And he had learned and then become a strong producer in his own right. This is a real big strength of Zeppelin. And you can see he's able to take a guitar, some basic effects, an amp, and with that, and a multiplicity of guitars. I'm sorry, it's actually, he's brilliant at using different guitars to create different sounds, and then creating this big sonic field. John Paul Jones is also a stalwart of the British music scene, and had become a well-known arranger, arranging Sunshine Superman, was it by Donovan, or was it Mellow Yellow? Actually, I think it was Mellow Yellow. And if you listen to the arrangement of Mellow Yellow, it's the arrangement that makes that track brilliant. So you've got these two geniuses, and then you have these two forces of nature. The primal, male lion, alpha, Robert Plant up front screaming, but also able to reach into these very tender areas that a lot of these sort of masculine frontmen couldn't do. And then, of course, the powerhouse that is John Bonham. And Bonham really wants to come to the fore here. He's doing all sorts of stuff. The drum sounds are incredible. And I think Bonham, for me, actually goes up a gear. All the way through Zepp, he goes up a gear for me, up until Presence. And then, he's there. I mean, but I feel, to really understand Bonham, you're not going to get it from listening to the early albums. Anyway, I'm really 15 minutes into this, and we've only just started to scratch the surface of this tune. So Songwriting's the Same is written by Jimmy Page and Robert Plant. Twists and Turns sets up the album. And when it drops down, Robert goes into this sort of I had a dream, which echoes sort of Martin Luther King. I have a dream. I had a dream, a crazy dream. Anything I wanted to know, any place I needed to go. Hear my song, sing along. Every little song that you know, everything that's small has to grow. This is it's almost like a children's television show, isn't it? It's just opened up, and this is polemical, isn't it? It's an announcement, and it really is like Robert's coming back from all this touring, all this traveling around the world, right? And he feels all powerful at that point, and it's all very positive. And then he sort of takes you around the world. California sunlight, sweet Calcutta rain, Honolulu starbright, the song remains the same. Sing out Harry Carey, dance the hoochie coo, city lights are oh so bright as we go sliding through. And it paints incredible pictures. It paints pictures of Robert and the guys driving around the world, seeing all these different weather conditions. It relates, the Harry Carey... the Harry of the Harry Krishnas to someone dancing the hoochie coo. There's all different levels of experience. The world is your oyster. This is a very exciting thing as we go and delve into this House of the Holy. So this then drops down, and it then runs into the Rain song, and we hear those delicate chords ring out. Now, those first two chords you hear are actually the chords to Something by George Harrison. The Beatles must have got a little bit niggled by Led Zeppelin. There they were, the biggest band in the world, all cheeky chappies from Liverpool, and then suddenly they're gone, and in comes this huge behemoth of Zeppelin. And so there's always a little bit of snidey comments coming from him, I think. And George Harrison went, "Oh, thing about Led Zeppelin is I can't do a Liverpool accent. Thing about Led Zeppelin is they can't write ballads." That's more like just a generic northern accent. They could write ballads. They've written ballads on all their bloody albums. Whether they think that's the way a Tangerine is, he was just wrong. But obviously Jimmy Page, he then makes the point of quoting something and then taking it off on this Odyssey. And here, everything's kept under control. This is the second track on the album, and they're taking you on a journey, a little bit like the Battle of Evermore. They've done this before. This is nothing new. But I think it's the fact that in this section here, it's almost like Song Remains the Same runs into this. And so we have this quite long epic. And then, whereas in the first track, Robert is going around the world. Now he's going around the sort of yearly clock. He's going from winter to summer, you know, and he's evoking the sort of English landscape, the English aesthetic here, the idea of, you know, crops being sown, crops being grown, the harvest, you know, all that is evoked in this thing. This is the springtime of my love in the second season I am to know. So he's talking here about, I imagine, getting into early adulthood. You are the sunlight in my growing, so little warmth I felt before. It's hard to feel me glowing. I watch the fire that grew so low. It's the summer of my smiles. Flee from the keepers of the gloom. Speak to me only with your eyes. It is to you I give this tune. Right, so he goes around this, equating this passage of time and the sort of passage of the seasons to his emotional feelings. This is really taking a leaf out of Joni Mitchell's book, much as they had done with Going to California. On the Untitled album, they're going to California. Now they've been to California and they return. And I love all this. This is all great. And then it runs into one of my favourite Led Zeppelin tunes of all time, and I love the way that the way this song meanders is being echoed with the sort of zigzagging of the lyrics here. This is called Over the Hills and Far Away. So we've opened up, right? We've announced we're in the world and the world's our oyster, and then we have gone round this year. We've found love and happiness. It's all very bright, you see. I think this is what makes this album stand out. It's all very bright. And then, once he's found the love, they go off on this merry dance of Over the Hills and Far Away, which for me it's like a cheeky and chirpy Stairway to Heaven. It starts off very jaunty. It's very proggy, almost like Jethro Tull in a way. But it's Robert's so great at being emotionally open. And he's a balladeer. I always feel this. He's a balladeer. I originally had Mario Lanza up there instead of Frankie Lane, and now I wish I'd maybe have kept Mario Lanza up and not put Frankie Lane on. But I think all these influences are influences on Robert in terms of the way he delivers a song, right? And so, you know, he goes through this thing, and then that run is over. And I think this is what makes this album a little bit lumpy. Is after these first three tracks, it then goes into the grunge. Now, there's people who don't like the grunge. Now, the reason they don't like the grunge is because it's light-hearted, because it's almost like a parody. It's definitely how would we call it? It's definitely a homage to James Brown, and apparently this was written pretty much by John Bonham, although they all get a credit. But I imagine Bonham had created this incredible drum beat, which I believe is in 9. I can't quite remember. I've done it on another video anyway. Can't remember what time. It's either 5 or 9. It's one of the two, something like that. You'll come out and say, no, it's 11, Andy, but I can't remember. But it's in a weird time signature. So it's that sort of James Brown display speed, but in this weird time signature. And then this incredible bass. And for me, musically, this is the best bit on this site. You know, it's so funky. And the great rock bands are funk bands. That's the key. You know, I was watching Aerosmith last night, watching some of those 70s live shows that they did. My God, were they incredible band. And my God, Joey Kramer. I mean, that is one of the greatest rock drummers of all time. And this had been motivated by watching the Joe Perry, Brad Whitford interview on Rick Beato, and they played Aerosmith, you know, playing James Brown tunes. I'm sure Led Zeppelin jammed on James Brown. James Brown, after Cold Sweat, is such a huge influence on heavy rock, right? And so this is why this deserves to be here. Of course, Robert carries on singing about, the love of his life. It's all about love. This is all about love, right? There's no sort of hobbits walking through, Mordor trying to find a girl. This is all straight about love. There's no, there is none of that, bustles in any hedgerows. This seems more grounded. It's more rooted in the real experiences they've had. I think this is great, and I love at the end when you start to say, where's the bridge? Where's the bridge? Can you not find that confounded bridge? Which he says in a very English way, pointing out the fact that they're an English band, that they're taking from it. This is more honest to me. This is definitely more honest, but I think it's jarring, and we'll get onto this once I've got through the whole album. So you turn it over onto side 2, and we have Dancing Days. Now, Dancing Days is quite a rocker. But up until this point, have we really had a rocker? Not really. And then Dancing Days comes on, and this always sounds a little bit like a sort of hippie, party tune, for those who don't want to go to a nightclub, but would rather, be jumping around, having a dance on some hay bales. And again, it seems to be rooted in a certain English aesthetic. But this is all tales of partying, fun, happiness, youth. I think Led Zeppelin often get portrayed as being a dark band with all this stuff going on. And I think now these guys are in their early 20s. They were thrown into a maelstrom, but most of the time it must have been the sort of most happiest, joyous time, especially at this point. This then runs from Dancing Days. We then run into Jamaica. And now this is a tune that is like Marmite for Led Zeppelin fans. I personally love it. Many hate it. It gets described as a reggae track. It doesn't sound like a reggae track to me, I would say it's more rooted in that music that existed in the 1960s that was somewhere between soul and ska. The sort of My Boy Lollipop with that. But this is a slower version of that, maybe trying to be reggae. I could argue that they didn't understand what reggae was. Towards the end, Robert says, whatever happened to Rosie in the originals, although I don't think he says it, but it's definitely in the lyrics. And I think that points to where they're coming out of. This is pop music, and it's tongue-in-cheek pop music as well. There's a lot of humour here. The title, Jamaica, is actually a sort of old British music hall joke, it's like where someone will go, my wife's gone abroad. And then they go, Jamaica? No, she went of her own accord. That's the joke. And this is what I love about Led Zeppelin. As they develop, being the preeminent band to emerge from the sort of blues boom in Britain in the 1960s, which was basically where middle-class British musicians took on the influences from Black American blues. And then the great bands then integrated that with an English aesthetic. And Zeppelin get to work on that pretty much from the first album, but by here they're masters of it. And here we have a certain humour brought in. The same sort of humour that I bring into this site. It's an English humour, a wry humour that actually pulls out the pomposity of it. And I think this is why this album is not pompous. It's fun. That's what this album is. It's fun. The fun doesn't stay for long though, because then we go into No Quarter, which is really the masterpiece of John Paul Jones. This tune had been around for a while. John Paul Jones had taken it home, worked out all these keyboard arrangements. And what he brings to this, which is really interesting, is a sort of modal jazz improvisational approach, which has its roots in Miles Davis. You can tell John Paul Jones was always bringing in that end. He was the muso in the band. I think there could well have been a little bit of tension between Robert Plant, who's not... Robert's much more of a mod than he is a rocker. He's much more into like the ballad, the tune, the meaning, the heart and soul, the songwriting. John Paul Jones is into all the sort of displacement, odd time signatures, weird scales, all that type of stuff. And of course, that creates an incredible tension with the powerhouse of John Bonham behind it, and then Jimmy Page coming in with his production process. It was like a perfect band. Of course, Led Zeppelin were the perfect studio band. They've got a reputation of being the great live band of that period. I don't think that's the case. I think they were the great studio band. And they were able to not end up going up their own bottoms like Steely Dan and going for perfection. Jimmy Page was able to retain that through placing people in real rooms. This is one of the biggest influences on me about Zeppelin, is that sound is them in a room. That sound is them playing together. Although at the same time there is so much studio trickery being employed. For example, song remains the same. Robert's vocals are sped up. Of course, he was no longer, just out of his teens. And as a man grows up, his voice starts to drop a little bit. And we hear Robert's voice changing. A lot of people will say nowadays that Robert can't hit the high notes that he could when he was young. That may be the case, but I feel that what he has swapped for that is an ability to sing the song and to be able to intone something that's far more richer and emotionally deeper. I think he's an incredible vocalist. And for someone who's approaching 80 years old, he is still a powerhouse. I think he's an incredible force of nature. They all are. That's what Led Zeppelin is, isn't it? It's like a force of nature. Something very powerful that ends up going down in flames, Now here, No Quarter, again, this is where we do intone that sort of a little bit of the old Middle Earth, don't we? But it never really opens up. We never know who these sort of people journeying through whatever they are, where they're going or what they're doing, This to me seems, rather than rooted in Tolkien, seems to be much more rooted in Though I Walk Through the Valley of the Shadow of Death. It's that aesthetic, which of course, this being the one dark moment on the album, in a way does sum up the period of time they're in, because there's that, they must have felt like that. Young guys in a maelstrom with all the stuff around them, being thrown into all sorts of situations. And aware that it could only go bad, which of course in a way it does. The album finishes with the ocean, and the ocean is almost like their rock and roll, homage, although it starts off pretty heavy, and this is sort of the heaviest moment, but it's then balanced by them dropping into that rock and roll bit at the end. Of course, it's a little bit of a joke because you think Robert is singing about love. There's been a lot of, I think, virtually every track, bar No Quarter, is about love, relationships, and the fun of relationships. And then when we get to this, we realise that in this case, he's talking about his kids and his daughter. Beautiful album. I think it's a great album. I really do. Of course, and this is where I want to end this video, is just chatting about what could have been. Because, of course, they recorded 4 other tracks, 4 really finished great tracks. Obviously, the title track, Houses of the Holy, which cropped up on Physical Graffiti a few years later, along with The Rover and Black Country Woman. Right? So those are the 3 on Physical Graffiti that are taken from these sessions. And then Walter's Walk, which features on Coda. Now, I think some of the perception of this is that there aren't enough rockers and there's too many humorous tracks. If we were to finish, instead of the Crunge, finish, say, with Houses of the Holy, so you have a journey all the way through to the title track, and maybe if Jamaica was replaced by Walter's Walk, or The Rover, although The Rover would not have run well into No Quarter because it's a very similar sort of territory of sound. I wonder whether Walter's Walk could have gone there instead of Jamaica. Now, if that had been the case, would this album have been, perceived in a different way from the fan base that were probably expecting something that was more bone-crunchingly heavy? Or were they right to do this? I think they were right to do this, to be honest. It's a shame that they couldn't have made it a double album, perhaps. Because for me, this was the moment where, in '73, you would have expected their great double album. Everybody was doing it. You get Tales from Topographic Oceans, you get Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. You know, every rock band at that point is bringing out their great big conceptual double album. It is the year of excess. And I wonder whether Zeppelin could have nailed it, because with all of that, that would have been incredibly strong at a point where they would have won over. Now, at this point, 73, they seem pretty exhausted. You know, they go and do the American tour. That's filmed for Song Remains the Same. That film takes a long time to come out because of various things that we will get onto, because I will be looking at that album on this list of this voyage through Led Zepp's albums. So we will deal with that then. And Physical Graffiti, although now a classic, was obviously patched together to appease an audience that would have been waiting for 3 years for a studio album. 76, they get back in the studio with Presence. So, it's 75, so they've been waiting 2 years for a studio album. I do apologise. By the time that came out. Led Zeppelin are about to... they're going to take a well-earned rest. They're going to go away and, you know, and get their act together. Although whether their act is got together at this point, I don't know. This marks the end of that first phase of Led Zeppelin. From now on, 73 to 1980, we're going to see a lot less produced. They're going to be doing other things. So that has been my voyage through this wonderful album. Absolutely great. Maybe this one really is up for people to have another think about what's actually going on here. Is it in reality greater than some of the albums that preceded it? It's hard, because you're arguing against it's almost against the iconography of Led Zeppelin. This is the problem that you have here. This one will not play the game. Even though the myth of Zeppelin wasn't in existence at that point, they are playing against type here. That's what I get the feeling. They are having fun and they are being irreverent. And perhaps that irreverence doesn't fit the myth. And maybe that is the single thing I can leave you with that sort of gives a shape to how we think about this album. In the sort of Western Enlightenment view of art. Art is important when it's serious. I have come to learn that that is not the case. And it's much harder to be irreverent, and it's quite easy to be dark and serious. And so there is a more interesting truth and a more rounded and whole truth about the human existence when you have an album like this. And this celebrates youth. It celebrates being alive in the world, and it celebrates a certain position that the band were in to sort of drink deep what the world has to offer. With all the wonder, and most of the world is wonderful. Most of the world is incredible and full of joy, and people want to be happy and they want to spread happiness. We all want to be happy, and because we all want to be happy, we tend to want other people to be happy so we can all be happy together. That's a very powerful thing, but there is that little chunk of darkness in the middle of it, and that's what we have with this album, isn't it, if you think about it? Talking my way through it here, I think that I'm far more inclined to go and put this album on than to go and put Led Zepp 2 on. Because Led Zepp 2 has got Moby Dick on. Heartbreak is a bit, dumb. Bring It On Home's got a cool riff, but what's all that, what's all that about? Side one is pretty, sublime. But it's not the perfect album. This, in the way that the Moby Dick is just really tiresome, there's nothing on this album like this. Nothing. Is it better than Led Zepp 2? I think musically this is better than Led Zepp 2. Is it better than Led Zepp 1? I think it is, because Led Zepp 1 is undone by two great long sort of electric blues jams that we didn't need. Maybe they needed that in 1969, but I don't need to hear it now. and they did it so much better. It's not it quite is in the same league as 3 and 4, but I think it's above 1 and 2. There we go. There's the contentious viewpoint. I've talked it through. If you go back to my Led Zepp ranking, I wonder where I put it, but now it would be going up. I think at the end of this, once I've got right to the end, I'm going to do the ranking of rankings again to see where we land. So anyway, and I tell you, this one's going to be going up. And the next one on the list, Physical Graffiti, could well be going down. Anyway, let us... there's the sort of soap opera cliffhanger for you. Thanks for watching this video. If you like this sort of thing when I actually seriously talk about music, please put a like on. Subscribe. You can become a Patreon. You go and become a free member and have a look around there. There's loads of free content. And then if you like what I'm doing, especially if you want to listen to my new radio show, which the first season will be done. I've just got 3 more to do. That basically takes a voyage through all this lot behind me. So if you're interested in all that and hearing the actual music that I love that inspired me to do this, then, you know, become a paid up member and get your ears into that. But there's thousands of things over on Patreon. What else have I got? I've got the membership here, 2 levels of membership. If you're a drummer and you want to have my very relaxed drum lessons where I just sit behind the drums and talk whatever I want, love doing those, then please, you know, join. That's quite a cheap level. And then if you go up to the next level, you get the access to all that, plus early watchings of every video I do, plus membership videos. What else could you do? If you want to, you know, buy me a coffee, as they say in the trade, you could go over to my PayPal link where you could give me money straight. I love it when people do that. It's all, I mean, not every day I've had a bad day and I turn up and then somebody goes, oh, I love Andy, I love what you're doing. Here's $5. And I think, oh my God, the world's a good place. It's a nice place and you lot are the best. And I thank you all for watching. See you all soon. Bye-bye.